Namaste, and thank you for the heartwarming introduction. And so many things I just heard and learnt about your wonderful work. It's really a sign of changing times when I do believe that India is going to take a lead in knowledge, in imparting its age old wisdom to make this world a better place. And when we think of India and all its, at one point of time, that's how it was. When we think of India and those who have gone into its reconstruction in establishing the foundations of this wonderful land we all inhabit, then of course we think about the Vedas, the Upanishad, the countless seers and sages, of course the Gita, and then of course many other saints, sages, and then Sri Aurobindo, who represents a wonderful synthesis of the East and the West of the most ancient Indian culture, its beautiful realization, peaks of experiences, its wisdom, and in context of all that we experience today in modern life, and then through all this opening a way toward the future. So one of the most unique aspects of Sri Aurobindo, which I can share on a very personal note, because I had gone through a lot of writings in Indian thought and Western thought, both spiritual and intellectual, and something was missing, like a missing link. So that missing link was that always I felt this world is divided between two tendencies, one material and the other spiritual. And this somehow didn't satisfy, because we want this world to become a better place. But if we took the purely material paradigm, then the heart was missing, the soul was missing. It didn't make sense. And when if we took the purely spiritual stance, then this world was declared as a kind of impossible illusion. So I'm just compressing the whole thing. So one of the first sentence of Sri Aurobindo, which struck me, which I feel is one of the keynotes of what he brings new to the world, is all life is yoga. So this is of course a famous sentence in synthesis, and Sri Aurobindo reveals to us that this division we have created between materialism and spirituality is false and artificial. It's a division created by the mind, which looks at things either or, but there is a greater consciousness in which we can see things in a continuity, in a continuum, or as two poles of one existence. One need not cancel the material world to realize the spirit, and one need not cancel the spiritual to talk about the material. In fact, they fulfill each other. One of his very famous lines from Savitri, his epic poem, very proudly 24,000 lines, dearly, the longest epic poem in English language. So there he says that matter shall reveal the spirit's face. So a new thought which came with Sri Aurobindo, which was there in the Vedas but lost through the Middle Ages, and a period when there was a kind of renaissance going on in Europe, and India was subjugated under a kind of alien spell of an adverse Maya. So this new thought that he brought, that matter is a condition for the manifestation of the spirit. So ordinarily we were thinking that, well, matter is a bondage, this world is a bondage, it's an illusion, you have to leave it to realize God. But now we see that in Sri Aurobindo's view, it is not Maya, it is not illusion, nor, as the materialist would say, a chance series of random accidents, but this world has been deliberately created by delight for the expression and manifestation of the spirit. So I found it so refreshing, and of course there are hints of this in the Upanishads, but it has been lost, the trail has been lost. So this was so wonderful. One of the things that he brings is synthesis of world and God, of soul and nature, and of materialistic approach to life and the scientific approach. So this was one very beautiful thing. Based on this and on his own realizations, Sri Aurobindo released a number of new wonderful idea forces in the world, and to go through them very quickly. For instance, in the field of psychology, he brought back literally the soul. The word psychology, its root is psyche, which is the soul, but in modern psychology, being a psychiatrist, I had to read all this. It's anyways a field of interest. Everything was there except the soul. So even on Indian psychology forums, when I would discuss, I said, but where is the soul? Well, people would speak about Buddhist thought, but till that one could go. But talk about the soul and its, it's a taboo. So he brought back the soul to Indian psychology and gave a comprehensive understanding of human complexity, his motives, and how he acts. And all this was not in a theoretical framework. He spoke about the layers and levels and planes of consciousness, forces, beings, energy, etc. But this was not just a theoretical paradigm, but something which you could apply in everyday life. Even if we are not into yoga, we could understand how we act, why we act, what is the effect of this world upon us, and how we impact the world. So this is a very vast subject. As I said, each subject is a workshop in its own right. So he restored the soul to psychology, and in that sense gave us a very new understanding of what psychology is. And some of us, quite a few of us now, are basing our practice based on this understanding. Then in the field of sociology, which rightly you just mentioned, he took us beyond this break which we have between religious and secular thought. Both are inadequate, and he gave a new understanding which goes beyond religion and secular, which is spiritual. Strangely, both are aspiring, in the truest sense, aspiring toward that point where this world can become a beautiful place. So instead of those warring ideologies and religious understanding of life, he brought in the pristine purity of the spirit, that in the spirit, in the self, we are all one. So when Mother was asked, for example, how can humanity become one, she gave one simple answer, very beautiful answer, that when humanity becomes conscious of its origins. So I was so when we look at the Vedas, the Puranas, they don't talk about our immediate context. They start from the origin. So what is the origin? Based on that, if the origin is nihil, if the origin is just a random series of somehow material substrate, then obviously there is no scope of union. All of our efforts will break down into towards a nihil. But if the origin is divine, then it is understood that whether it be ourselves individually, others who are around us or far from us, the stars, the galaxies, the water, river, mountains, flowers, animals, all of them contain that origin. So that should be the basis of unity. So he gave a very new sociology in which the way we would understand, let's say, a criminal, the way we would understand a saint, how to create an ideal society. It's a very detailed work which he has given in human cycle, and in a world which is torn with war and battle, he gave a solution. And the Mother, of course, almost tried to materialize that solution, which is still going on. Aurobindo as an experiment at human unity based on this. So this was the second in terms of sociology. Then in terms of even before we come to biology, in the field of health, of course, in the field of health, Aurobindo spoke mainly from the yogic insight point of view, but he has given such remarkable insights about, let's say, what a virus really is. Of course, we know the material particle, but it is not just a material particle. The whole thing contains something else. There is a play of forces, energies, and then something from us. All this combined creates an illness. So he looked upon illness as a state of disequilibrium and disharmony, and how we can restore harmony through inner means. And there are higher forces which can heal us, forces of peace, quietude. So that's a whole science he gave us. In fact, he gave us, literally has used the word, a science of consciousness, in which we can understand matter, physics, everything on the basis of a whole new science of consciousness. This again a field which is worth exploring. His writings running into almost 130 pages, which have hardly been really read out, because we talk mostly about the philosophical aspect. So it's a whole science of consciousness that he has given. And then in the field of biology, or rather let me put it more accurately, in the field of evolution, because biology speaks about evolution of forms, and Vedanta speaks about evolution of the soul passing through forms. That's why in India, in Sanatana Dharma, we have the idea of transmigration, which is rebirth. So rebirth is because the soul is evolving from one form to another till it reaches a point where it is capable of uniting with the Creator. That's the whole idea of rebirth. So he gave a very new understanding of rebirth, that it was not about papa and punya and reward and punishment, but behind all these seemingly processes of good and bad and reward and punishment, there was something else which was going on. It was the growth of the soul through countless experiences till it reaches a point where it can realize that it is a portion of the divine. Now this is there in Vedanta, and Tantra also speaks about evolution of forms, some 84 lakhs yonis. So, but it was an abrupt end, that well, evolution has to go on till human beings are capable of realizing that they are portion of the divine. Then they can either enter into nirvana, or they can enter into moksha, or even unite with God in a kind of lay, and many other terms have been used for this. But Sri Aurobindo says that this is not the end point of the whole journey. In fact, this sudden end point would, in a certain sense, the whole idea of creation becomes absurd. If creation has to be so that the soul returns back to the creator, leaving this whole field through which it passes just the same, then it makes no sense at all. It also makes no sense of the successive pralayas, the ice ages, call it whatever, and the entire evolutionary journey through different forms. It suddenly becomes absurd. So there was a big vacuum between our experience of moksha, and if there is something beyond, what is it, what for this creation is. So here Sri Aurobindo completes the whole, that missing link, that evolution of the soul does not finish with moksha. Moksha is one radiant step where the soul must realize, it must grow and must understand that well, this world of various forms and names and qualities, it has assumed, just like we wear a coat and we wear a dress, but this is not what we are. Now this of course is common to all spiritual teaching, and Sri Aurobindo's yoga also starts from this teaching of the ancient sages, that there is but one reality and the soul must wake up to that. But then what next? So it says that discovering that you are part of the divine consciousness is the beginning of another journey. So evolution is not over with this realization, but in fact it enters a new phase. So that new phase is when there is evolution taking place consciously and in freedom. So right now evolution is an unconscious process, except when we wake up to a deeper possibility of the self and we begin to practice yoga. But after realizing this self, there is something greater, and that he spoke about manifesting the self, manifesting the divine in creation. That's where he brought in this whole idea of transformation, that there has to be the soul itself. While it is recovering the koshas, it's not enough that it discovers the annamay kosha, the pranamay kosha, the manomay kosha, but there is also the anandamay and the vijnanmay. Vijnanmay incidentally has been unfortunately very often associated with the intellectual self, but and the bliss self as the bliss one experiences within, but that is a reflection in the mind of the true vijnanmay. Here Sri Aurobindo says that vijnanmay is not just intellect, but something which exceeds the intellect much more than the human intellect exceeds the animal thinking. So one of the terms which was used, which struck me as something very beautiful, is the suprahuman operating systems. I love this term. So this, there is something, human operating systems at most go up to intellect, but there is a greater operating system which he spoke about. He mapped out the further course of evolution of man from the rational intellectual man to a man in higher mind, with illumined mind, intuitive mind, the over mind, and still beyond into the supramental. So supramental, again, is it a new discovery of Sri Aurobindo? Well, supramental has been spoken of, hinted at by the rishis of the Upanishad and the Vedas. For instance, when Rishi Yagnavalkya says Hiranmayana patrena satyasya apihita mukham satya dharmaya drishte, so he is basically speaking of the law of truth which must govern our lives, so beautifully, which was mentioned as the divine will governing our life. So this we do not know right now. We are in ignorance. What is that original purpose of creation? That secret is there in the supermind. So what was the difference between the glimpse of the Vedic rishis and what Sri Aurobindo is saying? Well, the difference is like this, that while in the age of the Vedas and the Upanishads, we could see we compare it to, many of us, we know that the sun exists. Somebody says that, does the sun exist? Well, unless one is totally blind, the sun exists. So have you seen it? Well, it requires special equipment, and you have to put veils through which you can see it. Maybe a very dark glass, and not any time and every time, maybe early morning sun one could see, but not the full blaze of the sun. And this was known. We knew about the sun, we worshipped the sun, we prayed to the sun, we invoked the sun in our prayers. But can this sun, the power of the sun, be tapped, and we can change our earthly life based on that. Now I am using a physical analogy that sun was known since ages, but it is only with this research in solar energy that we started tapping the energies of the sun and building panels so that they can receive and use this energy. So same way, the divine, the supramental has been glimpsed by yogis, but how to join this divine consciousness, divine energy, divine power, divine wisdom, divine love, if we like, divine bliss in with our mind, life, body, and everyday activities. So that was the big challenge. Can it be brought down and applied in such a way that human beings, not just the human soul, they grow into the divinity which we are meant to be? So in ancient yogas we see that there is so much stress on trance, because only in a state of samadhi we could go far away from this material field, waking field, and then we could have a glimpse somewhere on the heights, like from Mount Everest we can see the sky. But here Sri Aurobindo wants to bring that power, the divine power, the divine consciousness, the divine ananda into our everyday life. Can our thoughts change by the touch of this power and this glory? Can our heart change, be transformed from a heart which can hardly contain the power of love, beauty, harmony, and joy, into a heart which is like a divine love? Can it manifest? And similarly, when we go down, can our life force, which is right now prone to fatigue, prone to disturbances, can this life force change into a divine life where it is not only filled with inexhaustible energy, but the purest form of divine energy? And finally, can the very body change by the touch of the divine energy, divine power, the supramental power and force, into a body which is increasingly progressively divine? So if that could happen, it would lead to a complete freedom from not only within, which is mukti, but freedom in our life, in actions, freedom from the law of karma, freedom of the body from death, disease, disintegration, etc., etc. So this is the project. We can use the word experiment if you like, that Sri Aurobindo and the mother were engaged in this wonderful land of Puducherry, which in many ways is blessed to have been chosen for this work. And of course the great ancient sage Agastya Rishi, who had chosen this place, and many others, as you beautifully said. So it is the grand culmination of a spiritual evolution. Spiritual evolution doesn't complete itself by us realizing, or the soul within us realizing it's a portion of the divine. It has to now undertake another journey wherein it must become a joining point. The mother described the soul in a very beautiful way. She said, we take the body, mind, and this outer personality as a lamp, and the divine as generator, then the soul is the wire which connects the two. So when we have the soul, then we have a connection between the divine consciousness and this material existence. Now we may use this to go away from the material existence into the divine and annul oneself, or we may use this connection to bring that divine consciousness into this field, worldly field, material field, the field of mind, life, heart, body, and transform it. So Sri Aurobindo chose this second option, which is of course a much more difficult option, because once you realize the origin, you can go and merge into it. But to tune every part of our thought, every feeling, every life impulse, will, every movement, every moment, and the very body activities, the organs, cell, everything, to that divine consciousness and energy, so that it eventually escapes from all finite limitations, as well as from the law of disintegration, degeneration, illness, and death. This is the project which both of them were engaged in, as a result of which the supramental manifestation on 29th February 56, after which we can safely presume, of course the eye of faith is a different eye altogether, that we are living under very different kind of a consciousness, and the world before 1950 and the world after 1960 are two very different worlds. Many changes which have begun, which have been initiated, maybe over 1,000 years we shall realize it. Just like when human beings came into existence, maybe at least 1 lakh years, maybe a million, as some say, years back, so much similar to born, moving in the savannas, moving in the heart of India, moving in other places, and suddenly they evolved to this point because a new principle called the mind was, or mental consciousness was established. So similarly now the supramental consciousness is established, and it is moving human beings more and more towards a still greater destiny. So another very unique thing about Sri Aurobindo is that, he speaks about the future and destiny of mankind and this earth in not only a positive way, but in a very different way than it has been envisaged. Ordinarily, we, from the material point of view, we look at human destiny, and if we can analyze with the events that human beings have indulged in, we would call it a dismal affair. Maybe by chance, random accident, we may develop some, like AI, some new equipment, organ transplantation. But human beings, if they remain the same, then whatever system we may have, we will ultimately mess it up. So this is the whole key, that if we don't change, there is nothing we can do about, we may have the best of governments, best of systems, but we'll mess it up because we are operated by the ego, desires, ambitions, fears and greed and lust and all these things. And whereas the yogi who undertakes the mission to conquer all this, he ends up saying that this world is a Maya, it has really no future. Its only future is you realize yourself. So that's all it is meant for, a kind of shadow play, a field for experience. Now Sri Aurobindo says, no, that's not the purpose. This world is created by, for a beautiful purpose. It is meant to grow increasingly divine. And we can see it implicit in the logic of evolution. If we look at the whole journey of evolution from dust to man, whether we look at it from the scientific point of view or spiritual, it is impossible to take it that it is going to stop here. It's inevitable. How would evolution suddenly stop with man? But what it is going to come, that we do not know. There have been all kinds of forecasts by Asimov from a spiritual science fiction point of view, or Nietzsche and others, and these forecasts are not very good. But Sri Aurobindo brings really the good news that no, this evolution is not only not finished, it is going to complete the curve, because he saw that behind the evolution of form there is a conscious power. So this evolution of form is not a random accident. It looks like that because we don't understand the deeper processes. So we just see, so-called external changes, and we see some random processes taking place, but there is a conscious power which is behind this plan of life. There is a hidden plan, and this plan is not just going to be over with man. Man is a transitional being and he will be overpassed. So this is something very unique and new. But unlike Nietzsche, who foresaw the coming of a very beastly Superman, or a Rakshasic and Asuric Titanic Superman who will crush humanity, Sri Aurobindo foresaw the coming of the new man, the divine being, the supramental race, as someone who is as a race of benevolent, wise ones, not only with this physical appearance being the same, but the very body changing, and many of its propensities, animal propensities and Asuric propensities, they are going to be lost naturally, and a new being is going to arise out of the old. So this is in short some of the very beautiful, unique things. He of course spoke about many other things. For instance, I'm not sure if any yogi has given this kind of a thought to all the world affairs. Leave aside materialistic thinkers. For instance, he saw the rise of Asia. He saw the union of world unity taking shape, and he saw India's spiritual gift to the world. Especially India has to play his writings in India, and one of the things, unique things which he contributed to the ideative world, and it's something which every nation needs to take up and understand, is that each nation has a soul. So for him, country was not just a material aggregate. It was not just mud and clay and boundaries, but it was a living soul which had a body. So just as we human beings have a soul and have a body, a mind, an outer personality and an inner being, so too every nation has an outer body which it has assumed for manifesting its own unique possibilities. So every nation, not only India, but in the Indian context, because India has to play a central role according to Sri Aurobindo in the resurgence of the world, its march towards the great fulfillment for which creation has been made. So he spoke about the Indian soul. It's a soul. She's a mother, not just because we emotionally connect to her as motherland, but it's a living and conscious deity. And he said every country should discover this deity. It's not just about India, and that's why perhaps we see that this is the true side of nationalism. There is the false side, which is an aggressive nationalism which tries to encroach upon other boundaries. That's a more Asuric and Titanic kind of nationalism. But there is a Daivic kind of nationalism where each nation discovers its own soul, unique soul, and contributes in the world yagna. So this was another very unique contribution of Sri Aurobindo, and most importantly, as I just mentioned, that man is a transitional being. He was not professing it. Prophecy is something where you see an event which is going to take place. He actually worked towards it and knew all the processes, the nitty-gritties, and how and when and everything which he has spoken, so much in his writings, that man is a transitional being. He will be overpassed by a greater diviner being with a nobler heart, a wiser and wider mind, a luminous life force, and eventually a body which will become progressively divine. So these are some of the unique features, and to realize it, he gave a path: the integral yoga, the supramental yoga, which is itself a subject. But in nutshell, in this particular yoga, one does not work only for the emancipation of the soul, but also for the emancipation of the body and the mind and the life. So it's a yoga where one works at both ends. On one side, there are ways and processes by which the soul is awakened and taken to further and further, higher and higher levels. On the other hand, one cannot neglect the outer being, the surface being, the mind, heart, physical, and most importantly the life and the physical body. So there is so much stress on these elements also in the ashram. I'm sure some of us who have visited would be struck by this wonderful thing that the ashram has a very elaborate physical education department with all the latest thing, not because we want to have just strong muscular body, but the body must be fit to bear the pressure of the divine manifestation. And last but not the least, toward this process, when he gave the yoga, and in yoga the key was the mother, opening to the mother in every aspect. But to hasten the process, he gave a very new idea about education, and the Center of Education here, Sri Aurobindo International Center of Education, SAICE short form, was meant to basically as a platform to build children into a integral being where the body, mind and life, at the same time the soul, all of them develop to eventually, with this purpose of becoming more and more instruments of the divine will and the divine wisdom and divine power in this creation. So he gave a very new idea of education, very radical, where not only there were no exam systems, etc. That's the least of important of things. No teacher is paid, no student is charged, but those are just elementary aspect. The most important is it's a education which he termed as free progress, meaning thereby education guided by the soul. So if we go back to the ancient Gurukul system based on the Sudharma, it was not that everybody has to enter through the standard process. In the beginning, yes, but as children grow up and their nature and their inner being begins to demand and need a line of development, so that has to be encouraged. So this was one of the unique aspects, another unique aspect through education to create beings who tomorrow will become representatives of the future humanity. Now all this of course is a work in progress. To summarize and close, I may say that it's a work in progress. It is something which is maybe a few 100 years project, and more people are drawn to this new ideal, and they are connecting with this new approach, because there are more and more people who do not want either an otherworldly life, not just the worldly life, but joining the worldly and the otherworldly. Let me close with this message of the mother, which she gave: the future of the earth. That's what we are most concerned about as earthly beings. The future of the earth depends upon a change of consciousness, and the change is bound to come, but it is left to men to decide whether they will collaborate for the change, or the change is thrust upon them by the power of crashing circumstances. She gave another very powerful message, that a new world based upon truth, Refusing its own slavery to falsehood is born. And there are human beings all over the world who feel it, who seek it, who want to become part of it. And it is to them we call, will you collaborate? And then these last few lines from Savitri, as I said, his magnum opus. Even as of man came behind the beast, um, uh, behind his tardy pace, the Superman would come. And he puts it very beautifully. It's like an invitation to all of us. Oh, force compelled, fate driven, earth born race. Oh, petty adventurers in an infinite world, and prisoners of a dwarf humanity. But not for a changeless littleness where you meant, not for vain repetition where you build. Your actions can be swift revealing steps. This transient earthly being, if he so wills, can fit his acts into the transcendent scheme. He who now stares at the world with ignorant eyes can fill those orbs with the immortal sight. So, evolution is not over. This is the good news, that evolution will grow towards something more and more beautiful, more and more divine, is the even better news. And we can consciously participate in this process, is the best news that Sri Aurobindo came to announce to us. Is the future, luminous future, advancing towards its own realization. Thank you so much. So, yes, that's